Hey everybody, it's Lori, and I am here today with my September reading wrap up. In the month of September, I read 9 books. I listened to 3 audiobooks, I read 3 ebooks, and I read 3 physical books. So I'll just go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and start with fiction and move to nonfiction. So, I guess I'll start with YA fiction. I did read 2 books in this category. The first of the books I read in this category was The Lost Causes of Bleak Creek by Rhett and Link from Good Mythical Morning. So I talked about this in more detail in a video I did on reading YouTubers' books. So I will link that below and maybe up in the cards if I can remember to do that. And you can go see what my more in-depth thoughts on this book. I thought it was a fun YA, probably kind of like supernatural thriller almost. I enjoyed reading it. It's definitely one that I think you would have fun reading, particularly if you are about my age, because Rhett and Link basically wrote themselves into it in their childhood. So it's set in the mid-80s. So that's just kind of fun for old people like me. But I think it would be enjoyable to younger people too. They just might not appreciate the 80s references the way I did. The other YA novel I read was actually one in verse, and that is The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. I enjoyed this a lot. Now, I will admit that probably for the first third to half of the book, I was not sure if I was going to like it, but I really appreciated how it wrapped up at the end. So basically, it's the story, a coming of age story of a young girl who has a twin brother and is living in a highly religious family. Her mom had wanted to be a nun, but ended up marrying her dad. And she is struggling with her family, with the concept of faith, and just with expectations on her. And she writes a lot of poetry, and that's kind of how she discovers herself almost. So I really did enjoy this in the end. The beginning was a bit of a rough start for me, though. Moving on, I guess I will do classic type books next. The first one is definitely a classic. I finished listening to David Copperfield. This one took me probably 2 full months. It's like 35-ish hours. The narrator I listened to was Simon Vance. And I really enjoyed David Copperfield. It definitely has taken the place of my favorite Dickens book. Up to this point, it was probably A Tale of Two Cities. And I haven't read a ton of Dickens. I've done like A Christmas Carol and The Chimes and A Tale of Two Cities and Great Expectations. But, David Copperfield just blew me away. I really enjoyed it. Favorite story by far. I like how far it goes. It starts at his birth and it ends, well into his adulthood. And it just deals with pretty much everything, and the characters in it are just fabulous. I love his aunt, his friend that keeps popping up all over the place. Uriah Heep is hilarious. Just all sorts of great characters in David Copperfield. So highly recommend that one. If you enjoy Dickens at all, I think you will enjoy David Copperfield. I also read The Code of the Woosters by P.G. Wodehouse. I would kind of put these under the category of classics. I don't know if everybody would, but Jeeves and Wooster are P.G. Wodehouse's kind of most famous characters. Bertie Wooster is like a wealthy Englishman, and Jeeves is his manservant. And Jeeves is brilliant and always can solve the problems. And Bertie is not quite as brilliant and relies heavily on Jeeves to get him out of all of his hijinks. So in this one, I talked about this a little bit in our library haul because I had already started that. So if I remember, I will link that above as well. But in this one, he ends up going to the house of a man who used to be a magistrate, and his daughter is supposed to be marrying one of his friends, but they keep having like this on again, off again. And so Bertie is trying to help them get back together, but at the same time, his aunt wants him to steal a silver cow cream pitcher from the father of this young woman, because he kind of bought it out from underneath her husband, and she wants something from her husband and can't get it unless he has the cow creamer pitcher. So hilarity ensues. There's lots of like different romantic things going on where this couple wants to be together but they can't be together, and this couple's going to be together but then they break up. And Jeeves just managed to solve it all. But at the beginning of the book, all Jeeves wants to do is go on a world cruise, and at the end of the book, Bertie says, why don't you go ahead and book that world cruise? And Jeeves says, I already have the tickets. So apparently they were going on a world cruise whether Wooster wanted to or not. So it ended well for Jeeves. Anyway, it's hilarious. I highly recommend any of the Jeeves and Wooster stories. I haven't read them in order. I think this might be number 7. It doesn't really matter. You figure out pretty quickly what's going on with these two. And then the third kind of almost classic literature, again, this one might not be considered truly classic literature, but kind of older, was The Man in the Queue by Josephine Tey. Now, Josephine Tey wrote a book that I read maybe a year to a year and a half ago, called The Daughter of Time. So that book was just fabulous. One of my favorite books. I read it and then I bought a copy because I loved it so much. So this is the book I read that I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. And it's actually a book in the middle of a series. It's about Inspector Alan Grant, who is a detective at Scotland Yard. So that's kind of his backstory. In this one, he's had an accident and he's recovering in the hospital. And the whole thing takes place while he's in the hospital bed. So good. Highly recommend. So anyway, I thought I should read some more Inspector Alan Grant books. So The Man in the Queue is the first of the Inspector Grant series. And I enjoyed it. Not as much as I enjoyed The Daughter of Time. There's just something about that book that just will always be so special to me. But I do enjoy Inspector Grant and the way he thinks and how he goes about things. And in this one, a man is murdered in line in a queue going into a theater, and he's trying to determine who the murderer was, but nobody saw it happen. So he has to interview all of the people that were around. And in the end, he does finally get to it, but he's about to give up being a detective over not being able to solve this case, because it looks like this one person is the most likely suspect. But when he arrests that person, there's kind of this back and forth about, well, he has a story and his story is making sense. So Inspector Grant, even though it looks like he solved the case, wants to go follow the leads from this man's story. And in the end, he does end up getting the person, but not in the way that was kind of expected. So Man in the Queue was another good one. If you're looking for a fun mystery novel, I don't feel like it was terribly long. I did listen to that one as an audiobook, so it's hard for me to remember. I'm thinking it was like in the 8 to 10 hour range for an audiobook, so it's not a super long book, but it was very fun to listen to, and I did enjoy the narrator on that one as well. And then the last fiction book, I hope. And then the last fiction book that I read this month was called Destined to Fail, and that was by the YouTuber Samantha March. She does beauty YouTube and she writes romance novels. Now, romance novels are not really my genre, so it's not exactly something I read all the time. So I don't really have a lot to compare it with. I've read some romance novels. I'm more likely to read classics that are kind of classified as romance than just general romance, but, I do occasionally read one. And I thought it was pretty good. It was her first book. She's written several since, but I didn't want to do one of her later ones because they're in a series. And I enjoyed it. Again, you can check out my video that I'll have linked below of reading YouTuber books for more about it. But it was a cute book. It was a light-ish read. It had kind of a motivating voice to it. You could just tell that the author was trying to get people doing things, like living their lives and finding their purpose and that sort of thing. So it was a little bit like inspirational speaker-y, particularly towards the end. But, if you're looking for a romance novel and would like to give that one a try, I did have fun reading it. I don't have great critiques of it because, again, not the biggest romance reader. And then moving into my nonfiction, the third book by a YouTuber that I read was The Financial Diet by Chelsea Fagan, who is one of the creators of the YouTube channel, The Financial Diet. And I did enjoy it. It was a money book, but a little bit different than a lot of money books. I really appreciated the food and home chapters. I really could have passed on the love chapter altogether. What was kind of interesting was, rather than just saying this is how you can save money on the things such as food and home, it talked about you want to live the life that you want to live, and how can you do that? So, maybe cooking at home more will help you because you do save money, but here's some ways to make cooking at home more pleasant for you. And it had recipes. We tried the red beans and rice recipe. It was really good. It was just kind of an interesting take on a money book, and one I haven't seen quite as often. Okay. I also listened to a memoir this month, and it was Why Not Me by Mindy Kaling. I had listened to her other book. What was the name of it? Oh, her other book is Everyone Hanging Out Without Me, a month or two ago, and I enjoyed it. It was just a fun kind of end of the month. I just wanted something lighthearted in both cases, both last time and this time. Wanted something kind of lighthearted and fun to just listen to, because I didn't really feel like starting anything too in-depth. And so this one is just her second book, so it kind of talks about her life and a lot about her experiences while she was doing her show, The Mindy Project, which I have never seen, so I know nothing about it, but it sounds like it was probably pretty funny. And she just has a very extremely conversational tone, and she's just a funny person, so I really kind of enjoyed just having a funny person talking to me while I, just kind of hung out and relaxed. So that was a good memoir for me to just kind of listen to when I just needed a little pick-me-up. I think I only have one more to go. And the last book I read this month was Stamped, Racism, Anti-Racism in You by Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi. I did listen to Kendi's Stamped from the beginning several months ago now, and I really enjoyed it. It was a very in-depth history lesson of race throughout the history of America. And this one is actually targeted towards young adults, and I think it was really well done. It turned the history into slightly more readable and more enjoyable to read. Like, not that the history wasn't enjoyable, but less like a history textbook. So Kendi's original book was a little more history textbook-y, and I don't mean that in like a bad way. I just mean like very fact-heavy, fact sort of thing. And there's more narrative put into this by Jason Reynolds. So I thought this was really well done, and I did recommend this to my kids and my husband, just because not everybody has time to listen to or read Stamped from the Beginning, because, again, I feel like that was a fairly long audiobook. But this one I read in a day. It was very accessible, and I just kind of picked it up and finished it the same day. So, highly recommend Stamped Racism, Anti-Racism in You, both for younger people and for older people if you feel like you need something a little easier to get into and faster to read. So, I thought this was a really good one. So those were the books that I read in the month of September. Please let me know in the comments if you've read any of these, if you'd like to talk about them, if you have recommendations for me based on the books I talked about. I would love to hear them. Feel free to subscribe to the channel if you like hearing about books. And yeah, I guess that's about it. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next one.